Chapter 1. The Offer. The office of Dominic Voss wasn't just intimidating, it was surgical in its precision. Clean lines, glass walls, and high ceilings framed the skyscraper view like a cityscape painting. Manhattan pulsed in the distance, a glittering blur of ambition. The desk between Sierra Quinn and Dominic looked like it had never seen a single paperclip out of place. Sierra sat stiffly, clutching her second-hand purse like it was a lifeline. She smoothed her skirt with trembling fingers, trying not to let him see the fray in her sleeve or the run in her tights. Her pride had carried her through a dozen rejections and 2 failed gallery submissions this month. But pride didn't pay rent. It didn't buy paint. And it certainly didn't cover medical bills. Dominic Voss stood across from her, one hand in his trouser pocket, the other resting casually on the back of his leather chair. He wasn't just handsome. He was the kind of sharp, dangerous handsome that made women drop logic in favor of poor decisions. Broad shoulders, strong jawline, and eyes so dark they could pass for coal. His hair was pushed back with the effortlessness of a man who didn't need to try. Everything about him screamed power and perfection, and it made Sierra's stomach twist. "I read your file," he said finally, flicking the folder closed with a single tap. "You're 6 months behind on rent. Your studio was condemned due to fire code violations. Your mother is in assisted care with medical costs exceeding your annual income." Her eyes flashed. "I didn't come here to be dissected." "Good," he replied, unbothered. "Because I'm not offering a job, Miss Quinn. I'm offering a contract." She blinked. "Contract for what?" He straightened, stepping around the desk and lowering himself into the seat opposite her. "Marriage." Sierra laughed. A short, incredulous burst. "You're joking." "I don't joke." Her laughter died as quickly as it came. He stared at her, unmoved. Every inch the billionaire heir he was. She'd read about him before coming here, CEO of Voss Enterprises. Inherited half the city before 30. Ruthless negotiator. Bachelor of the Year, 3 years running. "Why me?" she asked. "Surely your Rolodex of supermodels has more willing candidates." He shrugged. "Supermodels come with baggage. Ambitions. Prenups. You're off the grid. No press. No scandals. And no one expects you to marry a man like me. That makes it believable. And what's in it for me?" He ticked items off like a man reciting a grocery list. "Housing. Full health care for your mother. A monthly allowance totaling $500,000 by the end of 1 year. You'll have access to a fully furnished apartment, a personal driver, and studio space should you want to continue painting." She gaped. "All that for a fake marriage?" He leaned in, voice low and deliberate. "It's not fake on paper. It's legal, binding. But emotionally, we remain strangers. No touching, no expectations, no romance. And what do you get out of it? My inheritance. The company's succession clause states I must be married by 33 to maintain my majority stake. That birthday is in 6 weeks." She studied him, the puzzle pieces snapping together. "So this is a PR move. It's survival. My cousin is circling like a vulture. If I don't marry, the board could vote to remove me. He'd turn Voss Enterprises into a circus, and thousands of employees would pay the price." Sierra sat back, disbelief coursing through her. "You really think I'm desperate enough to agree to this?" He didn't flinch. "I think you're desperate enough to consider it." There was a long pause. A weighty, suffocating silence broken only by the distant hum of the city. Sierra stood, heart pounding. "I'm not a pawn. Not even for $1 million. She turned to go, the click of her heels echoing like gunshots on the polished floor. Dominic's voice chased her before she reached the door. "Think about it, Miss Quinn. Pride doesn't pay medical bills. And the world doesn't care about starving artists." She didn't respond, didn't look back. But those words haunted her all the way home. 3 days later, the eviction notice came. Her landlord gave her until the end of the week to vacate the studio apartment she barely called home. Her mother's nurse called twice to report that the insurance company had denied coverage again. Sierra's paint tubes were dry. Her fridge held a single bruised apple. And her pride? It had started to feel like a luxury she couldn't afford. By the time she knocked on Dominic's penthouse door, her coat was soaked from the rain. Her shoes squeaked on the marble floors as she stood in his pristine hallway, heart hammering. He opened the door himself, dressed down in a black shirt and slacks, his sleeves rolled up and his expression unreadable. She didn't wait for an invitation. "I have one condition." He leaned on the doorframe. which is no manipulation, no emotional games. I'll be your wife on paper, but I won't be your puppet. His eyes didn't flicker. Deal. You'll cover my mother's care. In full. Done. I want the terms in writing. Everything. No surprises. He stepped aside, gesturing her in. You'll have a contract by morning. As she entered the penthouse, her breath caught. Everything gleamed. Marble floors, crystal lighting, a fireplace the size of her old kitchen. And in the middle of it all, a man she didn't trust offering her salvation wrapped in gold. You still think this is a good idea? She asked, turning to face him. Dominic shrugged. No, but it's a necessary one. She stared at him, the man who held her future in his palm. This will ruin everything, she whispered. He offered a glass of water instead of comfort. Then let's ruin it together. Chapter 2. Desperate Yes. Sierra Quinn had never been to a tailor before, much less one who took her measurements in a gilded showroom with soft jazz playing in the background and bottled water served like champagne. She stood in front of a mirror, her arms slightly raised as a petite woman named Camille circled her, pinning fabric and muttering French under her breath. The dress, a pale cream silk sheath, fit like it had been summoned by magic. It wasn't flashy, but it whispered wealth, and it was to be her engagement announcement outfit. Sierra stared at her reflection, unable to recognize the woman standing there. Her hair had been styled into soft waves that framed her cheekbones. Her skin looked luminous, her lips glossed, her posture confident, almost defiant. But inside she felt like an imposter. You're beautiful, Camille said softly, stepping back to assess her work. Sierra offered a tight smile. I look like a lie. Camille tilted her head. Sometimes, Cher, lies are survival dressed in satin. Before Sierra could respond, the door opened. Dominic entered the room like a thunderstorm in a tuxedo. His eyes swept the room, pausing briefly when they landed on her. For a second, a flash so quick she doubted it, something flickered across his face. Not just approval, not desire, either. Something that bordered on wonder. You clean up well, he said. She rolled her eyes. That almost sounded like a compliment. He handed Camille a garment bag. Your suit is ready for tonight. My driver will be here at 6. We're announcing the engagement at the Voss Foundation Gala. Sierra's mouth went dry. Tonight? Yes. It's our first public appearance. You'll wear the dress. Smile when I say something clever. Hold my hand when the cameras are on us. If someone asks how we met, you'll say we bumped into each other at a charity event. The story is already in the press brief. You really thought of everything, didn't you? He didn't blink. I don't leave things to chance. She turned back to the mirror. What happens after the gala? You move in. She froze. Excuse me. You're my fiancé. You'll be living with me. Temporarily. The board expects it. The media will track it. It won't be for long, just enough to sell the story. Living with Dominic Voss. The idea rattled her more than it should have. Not because she was attracted to him, though there was no denying the electricity in the air every time he got too close. But because cohabiting with a man like him meant constant reminders that their relationship was a performance. That everything, down to her smile, was scripted. I'll need time to pack, she said. You don't own much. Thanks for the reminder. He shrugged. It's not an insult. It's why I chose you. You're not after a mansion. You're after something real. That's hard to fake. Sierra said nothing. Because he was right, and that infuriated her. That evening, the gala was held at a rooftop ballroom overlooking Central Park. The skyline glittered like a necklace of stars draped across the night. Sierra stepped out of the car, Dominic's arm looped through hers, and for a moment, she forgot to breathe. Flashbulbs exploded. Reporters shouted. 1,000 eyes turned toward her, drinking in the illusion. Dominic Voss and his beautiful, mysterious fiancée. The billionaire and the artist. Sierra smiled like she meant it. Dominic leaned close, murmuring against her ear. Keep smiling. We're almost inside. His breath sent a shiver down her spine. Not from attraction, she reminded herself firmly, but from the awareness of how easily she could slip into this role. Inside, the ballroom was a sea of silk gowns and tuxedos, glittering chandeliers, and champagne towers. A live quartet played in the corner. Waiters floated by with trays of hors d'oeuvres too fancy to pronounce. Dominic introduced her to a string of executives, celebrities, and socialites. He held her hand when appropriate, brushed her back when they moved, kissed her temple as cameras clicked. And every time, Sierra performed. But when she ducked away to the balcony for air, her mask cracked. She leaned on the railing, city lights dancing below. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from exhaustion. Pretending to be in love was harder than she thought. "You're doing fine," came a voice behind her. She turned. Dominic stood in the doorway, 2 champagne flutes in hand. He offered her one. "I don't drink." "Good. Neither do I." He placed the untouched glasses on a side table and joined her at the rail. "You look like you needed saving. I thought I was supposed to be the one saving you." He glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. "You are." For a moment, they stood in silence, the noise of the party muted behind the glass doors. "This isn't your world," he said quietly. "No," she agreed. "It's not. Do you regret it?" She hesitated. "No, not yet, but I'm afraid I might." He nodded slowly. "We can adjust the contract. Set boundaries. Make it easier. It's not about the rules, Dominic. It's about who I become when I'm with you, or around all this. I don't want to lose myself in a lie." "You won't. You can't promise that." "No," he admitted. "But I can promise I'll protect you while we pretend." She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time since meeting him, saw something fragile beneath the arrogance. Not weakness, but the weight of control. "You don't let people in, do you?" she asked softly. He didn't answer. Instead, he turned to her and offered his arm again. "Come on. The press wants one more photo before we disappear." She took his arm. And this time, the smile on her face wasn't entirely a lie. Chapter 3, A Mansion of Secrets. Sierra didn't speak during the drive from the gala to Dominic's mansion. The car, sleek and silent, glided through the glowing veins of Manhattan, weaving past streetlights and late-night wanderers. Dominic sat beside her, scrolling through messages on his phone, his features lit in soft blue. Despite the performance they'd just completed, the hand-holding, the smiles, the careful glances, he had reverted into his usual self, silent, composed, unshakable. She couldn't tell if that steadiness comforted her or unsettled her. By the time the car curved past the wrought iron gates of his Upper East Side townhouse, the silence between them had grown thick. When the vehicle stopped and the door opened, she stepped out slowly, heels clicking against the polished stone driveway. She turned, expecting Dominic to give her some instruction or warning. Instead, he simply said, "Welcome home." Home. Sierra stared up at the massive 4-story brownstone, its black-trimmed windows glowing warmly from within. Ivy crept along its red brick walls like it belonged there, and flower boxes overflowed with white blooms. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a dream with too many sharp corners. Inside, the mansion was somehow more intimidating. Clean marble floors stretched across the grand entry, reflecting the glimmer of a crystal chandelier that hung like a crown from the 2-story ceiling. A curved staircase climbed toward the upper rooms. Everything smelled faintly of lavender and expensive wood polish. A uniformed housekeeper, no older than Sierra herself, emerged from a side hallway and offered a quiet bow. "Mr. Voss, Ms. Quinn, your rooms are ready." "Rooms. Plural." Dominic nodded. "I'll show her." Sierra followed him up the staircase, her eyes catching on the art along the walls. Modern pieces mixed with what looked like European classics. She knew enough about galleries to recognize one or two of the names. Originals, not prints. The hallway opened to a wing of the house that could have been a luxury hotel. He gestured toward a door with dark wood paneling. "This is your room. Everything has been prepared to your preferences. The closet is stocked with designer pieces, your size, based on Camille's measurements. There's a full bathroom attached. If you'd like anything else, just text me or the house manager, Eliza. Her number is on the nightstand." Sierra blinked. "You stocked my closet? I wasn't sure what you'd bring. I wanted you to have options." "Dominic," she said, eyeing him. "You didn't just marry me for show. You're managing me." His lips twitched. "I don't do chaos. And this arrangement, while unusual, benefits us both. I want you comfortable, compliant, honest of you. I find honesty is underrated." She stepped into the room and stopped cold. The walls were a soft, misty blue with pale gold accents. A fireplace glowed quietly at one end. The king-size bed was covered in ivory linens. Fresh flowers stood on the nightstand, and the walk-in closet peeked out from behind a mirrored door. It was perfect. It was overwhelming. Sierra turned back to him. "What's behind door number 2? He nodded toward the suite directly across the hall. That's mine. So you're not far, if anyone asks. But far enough for real privacy. Exactly. She hesitated, then said, thank you. For everything. Dominic looked at her, something unreadable behind his dark eyes. This isn't generosity, Sierra. It's business. But business doesn't usually come with roses and Dior. Consider it good branding. That night, after a hot shower and slipping into a satin robe she didn't remember picking, Sierra stood at the window of her new room and looked down on the city below. Her mother was safe. Her debts were disappearing one signature at a time. Her paints and brushes had been delivered to a studio in the mansion's lower level. It should have felt like victory, but instead, it felt like being suspended between two lives, one real and one rehearsed. And she wasn't sure which one would win. The next morning, she woke to the sound of birdsong and the smell of coffee drifting in from the hall. She padded downstairs barefoot, finding Eliza, Dominic's house manager, setting a small breakfast on the terrace that overlooked the private garden. Eliza smiled warmly. Good morning, Miss Quinn. It's just Sierra, she said, surprised. Not anymore. The woman replied with a wink. Mr. Voss left early for meetings. He asked me to remind you that your engagement ring fitting is at noon. And he sent over some newspapers. Your photos are all over them. Sierra groaned. Fantastic. She sat at the terrace table, sipping orange juice and picking at a croissant, while flipping through the glossy magazine Eliza had placed beside her. Sure enough, there they were. Front page. Billionaire bachelor engaged to unknown artist in surprise move. Who is Sierra Quinn? There were photos of them on the gala carpet. A close-up of Dominic looking down at her like she was the only woman in the world. And a paragraph that speculated wildly about how they met. The charity gala lie had stuck. With a sigh, she flipped the magazine shut. You don't look happy, came a voice behind her. She turned to find Dominic approaching from the garden gate, sleeves rolled up, jacket gone. It was the first time she'd seen him without armor. He looked almost human. You've seen the press? She asked. He nodded. They're impressed. You've already improved my stock image. Oh, good. I'm glad I'm aesthetically profitable. He sat across from her and poured himself a cup of coffee. You sound resentful. I'm adjusting. You knew what this was. I thought I did, but I didn't expect it to feel like you're disappearing, he offered. She blinked. Yes, exactly. Dominic leaned back, regarding her. Then let's adjust the terms. I don't want to rewrite the contract. I mean expectations. What do you need, Sierra? She hesitated. A key to the front door. That surprised him. Why? Because I'm not a guest. I live here. I deserve access. He nodded once. Done. Anything else? She met his eyes. Honesty. If we're going to live in this lie, I want the truth between us. Dominic looked at her for a long beat. Then, almost imperceptibly, he nodded again. Deal. Later that afternoon, Sierra explored the house. There was a library larger than her old apartment. A home gym. A pool in the basement lit with underwater lights. And, tucked away behind the art studio Dominic had ordered for her, a music room with a grand piano no one had touched in years. She sat at the bench, hesitantly lifting the lid. Her fingers brushed the keys. She used to play. Years ago, before things got hard. She pressed a single note. It echoed. Then another. And another. She played a soft, shaky melody. Something half-remembered from childhood. She didn't hear Dominic enter the room. But when she finished, his voice came softly behind her. That was beautiful. She turned, startled. I didn't know you were home. I came back early. He walked toward her, but kept his distance. You play like someone who doesn't want to be heard. She looked away. I don't play for people anymore. Why not? Because every time I did, someone asked me if I was sure I didn't want to do something safer. Something smarter. People are afraid of talent. It's unpredictable. They're afraid of failure. Dominic nodded slowly. You're not. I am, she admitted. Every single day. But I do it anyway. He looked at her, and this time, it wasn't unreadable. It was respect. You're not what I expected, Sierra. And you're exactly what I expected, she said with a small smile. But maybe a little more. They stood there, in that room full of secrets and music, the silence between them finally starting to feel less like distance and more like possibility. Chapter 4. The Rules We Make. By Monday morning, Sierra Quinn was waking up in silk sheets beneath cathedral ceilings. The bedroom had begun to feel less like a museum and more like a space she could breathe in. The closet no longer terrified her with its designer price tags. And when Eliza brought in her morning tea on a silver tray, Sierra no longer tried to wave her off. The mansion was still a kingdom she didn't belong to, but at least now, she knew where to find the keys. She tied her robe and stepped onto the terrace, where the early sunlight poured over the garden below. The city felt distant from here, almost like a memory. The place where she'd struggled to find enough paint to finish a canvas. Where she'd rationed meals and traded dreams for survival. Now, she lived with a man whose shoes likely cost more than her rent ever did. A man who still hadn't crossed any lines. And somehow, that made it worse. She heard the front door open somewhere below, Dominic returning from his run, like clockwork. He kept to a precise schedule: 5:30 a.m. run, 7 a.m. breakfast, 8 a.m. boardroom. Even on weekends, he moved like a man accountable to a silent metronome. The night after the gala, they'd barely spoken. But ever since their talk on the garden terrace, something had shifted. Not in the way he looked at her. Those stony eyes remained carefully guarded, but in the way he listened. He didn't just hear her anymore. He responded. And that was far more dangerous. Sierra padded downstairs. She found him at the breakfast bar, dressed in athletic gear, a towel slung over his neck, sipping something green that looked like it could power a spaceship. "You survived your first weekend in captivity," he said without looking up. "Barely. I had to fight off a goose in your garden." His mouth twitched. "That's Franklin. He's territorial. I noticed. He hissed at my sketchbook. Means he likes you." She poured herself coffee. "Then Franklin has a strange way of showing affection." Dominic finally turned to her, his expression unreadable. "So do I." She paused mid-sip. "Was that a joke?" "Don't get used to it." She set the cup down and leaned on the counter. "Dominic, we need to talk." "I figured. About rules. Boundaries. We can't just keep winging this." "I agree." That surprised her. "You do?" He nodded. "I've drawn up a list of expectations. And I assumed you'd want to do the same." "Of course you made a list," she muttered. "Would you like to review it now?" "Actually, yes." He tapped his phone, and a document popped up on the screen. He slid it across the counter to her. She scanned it, eyebrows climbing. Dominic's agreement. 1. Public affection is permitted when required. Private affection is not expected or allowed without mutual consent. 2. No entering each other's rooms without invitation. 3. All public appearances are to be coordinated by Dominic's assistant, Claire. 4. Personal lives remain private unless disclosure is required for the arrangement. 5. This contract is void after 12 months, or earlier if dissolved in writing. She looked up at him. "You're very good at making things sound cold. It keeps them from becoming complicated." Sierra grabbed a pen from the drawer and flipped the page over. Sierra's addendum. "I want access to the art studio 24/7. No cameras, no interruptions. My mother is not to be mentioned to the press. She's off limits. I get the guest bedroom, not the master suite. Don't ask why. I get one free zone in this house where I don't have to be anyone but me. Yuri not allowed to fix things with money when we fight." Dominic read it, then looked at her. "You expect us to fight?" "I expect you to be infuriating at least twice a week." He handed the pen back. "Then let's sign before breakfast gets cold." They signed it together on the granite countertop. A marriage built on signatures and sarcasm, and something she couldn't quite name. Later that week, Sierra stepped into her private studio for the first time. It took her breath away. Sunlight spilled through tall windows, painting golden stripes across hardwood floors. The walls were lined with shelves of untouched supplies, paint in every hue, fresh canvases, easels, sketch pads, and brushes that still had their protective covers. She walked in slowly, running her fingers over the materials. There was a soft hum from the heater overhead, and the faint scent of cedar and paint thinner mingled in the air. This wasn't just a room. This was freedom. She selected a blank canvas and pulled on a smock. For the first time in months, maybe longer, she dipped her brush into crimson and let her hand move without thinking. She painted until the sun shifted, until color became language, until her hand trembled with the emotion she couldn't speak. That evening, over dinner in the library, another one of Dominic's preferred low-press zones, he surprised her again. "I saw your canvas in the studio." She stiffened. "You said that room was private." "I didn't go in. The door was open. The light was on." She exhaled. "What did you think?" "I think the colors you used were angry." Her brows lifted. "Is that your version of art critique?" I think it was brilliant, he added quietly. That silenced her. Dominic leaned back, swirling the wine he hadn't touched. How long has it been since you painted like that? She stared at her plate. Too long. Life got in the way. It always does. She looked up at him. And what about you, Dominic? What got in your way? He hesitated, just long enough to let her know the answer wasn't simple. My father. Sierra sat back, surprised. I didn't think you talked about him. I don't. Not to the press. Not to friends. You have friends? That earned the faintest smile. No, not really. There was a weight in the air now. Something old and unfinished. My father was obsessed with legacy, he said. With perfection. With keeping the Voss name pristine. I was an asset to him. Not a son. Sierra didn't speak. She let the silence hold his story. He died before I turned 25. I inherited everything, including the board's paranoia. They inserted the marriage clause after his death. Said it would keep the personal life of the CEO appropriately stable. She frowned. That's invasive. It's strategic. Everything is with them. She tapped her fork lightly. And now you're married to a woman you barely know. Because she was the only one not looking to trap me. She met his eyes. Maybe I still am. If you were, I would have seen it. He said it like a fact, not a compliment. That night, Sierra stood in her room and watched the reflection of her life in the full-length mirror. Designer dress, curled hair, lipstick she hadn't been able to afford a month ago, and a heart that wasn't sure if it was still hers. Chapter 5, Close Enough to Touch. Sierra stepped into the back seat of the waiting car, her nerves buzzing as the driver shut the door behind her. It was the first event they'd attend together since the gala, a private dinner party hosted by a high-profile tech investor who also sat on the Voss Industries board. Translation: every move tonight mattered. Dominic was already inside, dressed in a midnight black suit with no tie, his shirt open just enough to blur the line between elegant and dangerous. He glanced at her, and for a heartbeat, his eyes paused. You look stunning, he said, voice low. She smoothed the folds of her emerald dress. You're contractually obligated to say that. I never do anything contractually. She gave him a look. We're literally in a contract. He leaned in slightly. That's different. Their eyes held a moment too long before Sierra turned toward the window. The illusion had to stay intact. They had to be convincing. And lately, she was starting to worry that she was the one being convinced. At the party, the grand dining room buzzed with whispered deals and clinking glasses. The crowd was the usual elite mix of legacy wealth and tech nouveau riche, dressed in muted power colors and exuding practiced charm. Sierra felt like a splash of paint on a white canvas. Dominic kept a firm hand on the small of her back as they entered, guiding her through conversations and introductions with polished ease. His touch was light, but it grounded her, made her feel like she belonged beside him, like she was more than just a temporary prop in a billionaire's life. But every smile she offered was borrowed, every laugh timed. She was playing a part, and the script was getting harder to follow. They were seated beside the host, a sharp-jawed man named Conrad Ward, who was watching Sierra with thinly veiled interest. So, Conrad said, swirling his wine, Dominic tells me you're an artist. I am. Any exhibitions? Sierra smiled politely. A few small ones, local galleries. Modesty, he said, eyeing her. I like that. Dominic's hand tightened slightly on her knee under the table. A warning. A claim. She's brilliant, he said coolly. One of the most talented artists I've seen. Sierra glanced at him in surprise. He wasn't playing anymore. Conrad smiled slowly. Well then, maybe you can convince her to let us buy a piece for the office lobby. Sierra stiffened. I'm not sure the lobby is the right place for what I paint. I like bold art, Conrad replied, especially when the artist is as striking as the work. Dominic stood. Excuse us. Before Sierra could respond, he guided her away from the table and down the corridor toward the empty library off the main hallway. Are you okay? He asked once they were alone. She blinked at him. You pulled me away mid-dinner. Because Conrad doesn't know how to be respectful. I've handled worse. I don't want you to have to handle anything. Her heart tripped. You're not my shield, Dominic, she said softly. You don't have to fix everything for me. He moved closer. Maybe I want to. The words dropped between them like stones. Her breath caught. They weren't supposed to mean anything to each other. That had been the rule. But suddenly, she was standing inches away from a man who looked at her like he wanted to rewrite every agreement they'd made. His gaze dropped to her lips. then back to her eyes. Sierra's pulse kicked. You said no touching, she whispered. You added that. You signed it. He exhaled sharply and stepped back, running a hand through his hair like it hurt to do it. Let's get you home. Back at the townhouse, Sierra climbed the stairs alone while Dominic poured himself a drink in the kitchen. The air between them had shifted. It wasn't just tension anymore. It was temptation. In her room, she peeled off the green dress and dropped it across the bed. She pulled on a robe and padded barefoot down the hallway. Her feet stopped in front of the piano room. Sierra opened the door and stepped into the quiet. The room was dim, moonlight streaming through the high windows. She sat at the piano and let her fingers glide across the keys, playing a soft, unfinished melody. A few minutes passed before she heard footsteps behind her. You play when you're unsettled, Dominic said from the doorway. She didn't turn. You drink when you are. He walked in and stood beside the piano. You were right to call me out. She stopped playing. About what? Trying to fix things. Using money to shield instead of protect. I don't want you to feel managed. Sierra looked up at him. Then don't manage me. See me? I do. He knelt down beside her bench, one hand on the piano edge. You walk into every room like it's a battle and you have to prove you belong. But you don't. You already do. With or without me. Her throat tightened. No one's ever said that to me. Then they're blind. His hand brushed hers, just barely. It wasn't scripted. It wasn't strategic. It was real. She didn't pull away. I should go, he said softly. You should, she agreed. But neither of them moved. The next morning, Sierra avoided the breakfast terrace. She needed space, time to think. Instead, she curled up in the studio with a sketch pad, hoping to draw out her confusion. But her lines kept drifting into his shape. She heard her phone buzz and picked it up. Dominic, I'm flying out tonight for 2 days. Meetings in London. Let Eliza know if you need anything. She read the message twice. A simple statement. Nothing more. But it felt like a door closing before either of them decided whether to open it. She typed back, okay, safe flight. Then, after a long pause, she added, don't stay gone too long. Chapter 6, The Past Comes Calling. Sierra stepped into the art studio and froze. The painting she'd worked on for nearly 3 days, her private canvas, the one she refused to let Dominic or anyone else see, was gone. She spun around. Everything else was untouched. Brushes neatly lined, canvases stacked, her apron folded exactly how she left it. But the easel stood bare. She checked the wall racks. Storage drawers. Nothing. Eliza? She called out, rushing into the hallway. Eliza? The housekeeper appeared a moment later, alarmed. Yes, Mrs. Voss. Did someone take my painting? It was on the easel, sunset colors, abstract cityscape. Eliza frowned. I'm not sure. Mr. Voss said he wanted to ship one of your pieces to the office. For the executive wing. I assumed he had your approval. Sierra's heart sank. He took it. I believe so, yes. He left for London just after lunch. Without asking. Without warning. Without knowing what that painting meant. She turned sharply and headed toward her room, fury and betrayal mixing in her chest like gasoline and spark. She texted him once. Twice. No reply. By midnight, she was pacing. And by morning, she'd made up her mind. She was done being handled. 2 days passed. Still no word from Dominic. No call. No apology. No explanation. The silence felt strategic. Intentional. And it hurt more than she expected. Sierra threw herself into painting, but nothing came out right. Her colors were angry, her brush strokes erratic. Her usual calm had been replaced by a storm she couldn't quiet. On the 3rd day, she grabbed her coat and took the subway downtown to visit her mother. The facility hadn't changed. White walls, soft music, nurses with practiced smiles. Her mother was seated near the window, her knitting needles clicking quietly. Hey, Mom, Sierra said, sitting beside her. Her mother looked up and smiled, slow and warm. There's my girl. They talked for a while, safe things. Paintings, music, the weather. Her mother drifted in and out, but when she was lucid, her eyes sparkled with quiet wisdom. Are you happy? Her mother asked, sudden and sharp. Sierra blinked. What? You're married. I saw the photos. You looked radiant. But I know that doesn't mean happy. Sierra hesitated. It's complicated. Of course it is. You married a man you barely knew. But the question stands. Does he see you? Sierra exhaled slowly. Sometimes I think he sees me more than I see myself. Then don't run. Not unless he stops seeing. When Sierra got home, Dominic's car was already in the driveway. She marched through the door, coat still on, heart pounding. He was in the study, jacket off, sleeves rolled, scrolling through a document. He looked up as she entered. "You're back. You took my painting. I wanted it for the office. You didn't ask." He stood. "I thought you'd be proud." "I'm not your possession, Dominic." Her voice cracked. "That piece wasn't finished. It wasn't ready. And it wasn't yours to display like some brand extension." His eyes darkened. "I wasn't trying to control you. I was trying to celebrate you." "By ignoring me?" He moved closer. "I messed up. I should have asked. I see that now." The tension in the air was thick, but something shifted in his expression, regret. Real, raw, unfiltered. "I've never had to ask before," he said. "People give. They offer. I've never had to consider how it feels to take." Sierra's anger wavered. "I didn't marry you to own you," he said quietly. "I married you to protect both of us. But somehow, I forgot that protecting you also means trusting you. And listening." Her chest ached. "That painting, it was my father's memory. His city, his colors. I wasn't ready to share it." He nodded slowly. "Then I'll get it back." She blinked. "You can't. I'll call the art team. Tell them to remove it first thing tomorrow. You'll have it back in the studio by noon." Sierra stared at him, stunned. Not because he offered, but because it mattered to him. Really mattered. She crossed her arms, softer now. "You know, I thought you'd say I was being irrational. I did at first. But then I remembered what it felt like when my father donated one of my first business plans to the firm's archive. I was 16. He said it was visionary, but I wasn't ready for anyone to see it. It still makes me angry." She smiled faintly. "So you do have emotions." "Only on Wednesdays." She stepped closer. "Dominic." "Yeah. You're allowed to feel things too." He met her eyes. "You terrify me." She blinked. "What?" "You make me want things I told myself I didn't need. And you're not even trying." "I'm just trying to survive this contract." He smiled, but it was sad. "It doesn't feel like a contract anymore." She didn't answer. She couldn't. Instead, she reached for his hand. It was the first time she touched him without obligation, and the way his fingers wrapped around hers said everything he couldn't. Chapter 7. The First Real Kiss. It was nearly midnight when Sierra crept downstairs, restless after hours of tossing in bed. Her mind wouldn't quiet. Not after the confrontation, not after the things Dominic had said, not after he'd reached for her hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. In the kitchen, the warm glow of the under-cabinet lights bathed the marble counters. She reached for a mug and made herself tea, the silence wrapping around her like a fragile cocoon. Footsteps padded across the wooden floors behind her. "I thought I heard someone," Dominic said, his voice soft and rough from sleep. Sierra turned, finding him barefoot in sweatpants and a t-shirt, hair tousled, eyes a little glassy. "I couldn't sleep," she murmured. "Me neither." He walked over and leaned against the counter opposite her, crossing his arms. There was a stillness between them, not cold, but charged. Something had shifted in the air since the fight, since the apology, since he'd offered to get her painting back without argument. Something fragile, real. Sierra took a slow sip of her tea. "Are you always this restless?" He nodded. "Every night." "Why?" "Because I'm never sure if I'm building something or watching it all fall apart." She set her mug down. "You hide it well." "I've had practice." Sierra moved to the island and leaned beside him, their elbows brushing. "Tonight, when you said I terrify you," she said, looking at the counter, "did you mean it?" He didn't answer right away. "Yes." "Why?" "Because you don't care about the empire," he said. "You don't want anything from me except honesty. And that's the one thing I've never had to give." She turned to him. "Then give it." Dominic's gaze locked with hers. "I think about kissing you every day." Sierra's breath caught. He stepped closer. "But I keep stopping myself because I promised you space. I promised not to cross lines. What if I don't want the space tonight?" His jaw clenched. "Then you have to tell me." She looked up at him, her pulse pounding in her ears. "I don't want the space." The moment cracked. Dominic's hand slid to her waist, slow and reverent, as if asking permission with every movement. She reached for him at the same time, fingers finding the curve of his neck, his collarbone, the place just beneath his jaw. Their lips met. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't rehearsed. It was a slow unraveling, a melting of all the walls they'd built between them. His kiss was firm but careful, like he was trying not to break her. Hers was searching, as if hoping to find some truth buried inside the man who always had answers but never showed his heart. He tasted like midnight and regret and possibility. When they pulled apart, his forehead rested against hers. That was not in the contract, she whispered. I'm revising the contract, he said, voice husky. Starting tonight. The next morning, Sierra woke up smiling. She hadn't spent the night in his room. They'd parted quietly after the kiss, both too uncertain of what came next to risk more. But it wasn't the same as before. This wasn't about obligation or appearances. Something had cracked open between them, and it was terrifying. She pulled on her robe and headed to the studio. The painting was back, sitting quietly on the easel, right where it belonged. A note was pinned beside it. It was never mine to take, but it's always yours to share when you're ready. D. Her throat tightened. She ran her fingers along the edge of the canvas and stared at the bold strokes. It wasn't angry anymore. It was truth, and now she could finally finish it. That afternoon, Dominic called her into his home office. I have to attend a weekend retreat in Napa, he said. Board members, investors. It's very couple-centric. Sierra blinked. Like wine tastings and trust falls. And group yoga. She laughed. You do yoga? No, but I fake it very convincingly. He stood and walked around the desk toward her. Come with me. Her smile faded. Are you asking, or is this part of the arrangement? I'm asking. She nodded. Okay, I'll come. His lips lifted just slightly. You might regret that. Not as much as you'll regret trying to outstretch me in yoga. He tilted his head. Is that a challenge? Only if you're not afraid of losing. He stepped closer. I'm not afraid of losing. Their eyes locked. And this time, when he leaned in to kiss her, she didn't hesitate. It was slower than the first. Deeper. A promise rather than a test. She broke it first, breathless. This is getting dangerous. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Then let's set a new rule. Which is, we stop pretending this isn't real. Chapter 8. Retreat of Secrets. Sierra's heels clicked against the smooth stone path as she followed Dominic into the luxury Napa Valley resort. The main lodge loomed ahead, modern, sprawling, and bathed in the glow of the golden afternoon sun. Everything around them reeked of money and curated experiences, from the hand-carved wooden doors to the uniformed staff lined up with scented towels and chilled champagne. She tightened her grip on her overnight bag. You okay? Dominic asked, glancing down at her. She nodded, feigning calm. It's just a lot. He leaned in with a half-smile. If anyone gives you trouble, just say the word, and I'll pretend to meditate them into shame. Sierra laughed despite herself. You're not that convincing. I've been called many things. Zen isn't one of them. A valet appeared, guiding them toward a glass elevator that overlooked rows of vineyards stretching into the horizon. Dominic's hand brushed the small of her back, gently directing her in. She hadn't realized how much she missed that warmth. That quiet sense of being protected, even if she didn't need it. Especially because she didn't need it. They were escorted to a private villa, and the moment the door clicked shut behind them, the luxury of it all hit her like a wave. Plush cream furniture, a stone fireplace, floor-to-ceiling windows that opened to a private terrace and pool. Sierra stood by the bed and turned to Dominic. This place is unbelievable. He walked to the window. Only the best for the board. And their spouses. He looked at her. Are you okay with that word? She tilted her head. Spouse. He nodded. Sierra thought for a moment. I'm okay with it in theory. In reality, I think we're somewhere between chapter 1 and the epilogue. That sounds like progress. The tension in his smile made her pause. Something was on his mind. Before she could press, there was a knock. Dominic opened the door to reveal a tall, polished woman in her 40s, blonde, poised, and wearing a designer dress that screamed inherited money. Dominic Voss, she purred. As I live and breathe. Sierra stepped forward instinctively, feeling a jolt of something sharp as the woman's eyes scanned her. Dominic gave a polite smile. Victoria, it's been a while. Too long, she replied, then turned to Sierra with a gracious yet unmistakably territorial smile. And this must be your wife. Sierra extended her hand. Sierra, of course, Victoria said smoothly. You're the artist. She said, artist, the way some people said waitress. Sierra's jaw tightened. Yes, and you are? Oh, just an old friend. She lingered on the word. Dominic and I were at Stanford together. Ah, Sierra said coolly. So you knew him before he learned to smile. Dominic choked on a laugh. Victoria's smile slipped for a half-second before she recovered. We're having cocktails on the west patio in an hour. You two should join. We'll be there, Dominic said. As the door closed behind her, Sierra turned. So, old friend. Dominic ran a hand through his hair. Victoria worked in finance for a while before marrying the heir to some Silicon Valley fortune. We dated briefly. It wasn't serious. She clearly disagrees. He sighed. It was a long time ago. Sierra stared at him for a beat longer, then turned away. Cocktail hour on the west patio was all sharp suits, clinking glasses, and veiled competition. Power radiated from every corner of the stone terrace. And yet, Sierra felt oddly calm. Until Victoria reappeared. She was draped over the arm of a lounge chair, sipping wine like a Bond villain in stilettos. I hope you don't mind me saying, she said, approaching Sierra. You don't seem like Dominic's usual type. Sierra gave her a tight smile. That's because I'm not a type. Victoria blinked, clearly not expecting a retort. I'm a person, Sierra added, with actual thoughts and a sense of humor. Victoria narrowed her eyes slightly. Well, you've certainly tamed him. Sierra tilted her head. Do you really think Dominic Voss can be tamed? From behind them, Dominic appeared, looping an arm gently around Sierra's waist. No one tames me, he said, his voice cool but final. I'm here because I want to be. Sierra looked up at him, heart thudding. It wasn't just a line. He meant it. That night, back in the villa, Sierra slipped off her heels and padded barefoot onto the terrace. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of grapes and something softer she couldn't name. Dominic joined her a few moments later, holding 2 mugs of tea. He handed one to her and stood beside her, watching the vineyard lights twinkle like fireflies in the dark. She's not important, he said after a long silence. Sierra didn't respond at first. She was still wrapping her head around how much she had started to care. I know. Dominic turned to her. You do? Yes, she said quietly. Because the man who stood beside me tonight, he doesn't belong to her. He never did. He set his mug down and turned her gently to face him. Neither of us planned for this. We thought it would be simple. Sierra swallowed. And now? He stepped closer. Now it's not. Her breath hitched as he brushed a thumb along her jaw. You make me want to stop pretending. Sierra's voice trembled. Then stop. His mouth found hers, slow and reverent and full of heat. But it wasn't just desire anymore. It was becoming love. Messy, terrifying, and real. And neither of them could deny it any longer. Chapter 9, Lines We Crossed. The sun poured into the villa the next morning like spilled gold, cascading over the cream bedding and wrapping Sierra in a soft warmth that didn't match the storm inside her chest. She lay still, listening to the faint sound of birds beyond the terrace doors, her eyes fixed on the ceiling, though her thoughts were miles away. Last night had changed everything. Not because of a kiss, though the kiss was unlike any she'd experienced before. It wasn't even the way he'd held her, his hands firm but reverent, like he was trying to memorize the shape of her soul. It was the way she had let herself feel something real. No defenses, no performance, no contracts or stage directions. Just 2 hearts exposed. And that terrified her more than anything. The bedroom door opened softly, and Dominic stepped in, dressed in slate-gray joggers and a navy tee, a mug of coffee in each hand. I made yours how you like it, he said, walking over and setting one on the bedside table. 2 sugars. Dash of oat milk. Don't ask how I remembered. Sierra sat up slowly, taking the mug and wrapping her fingers around the heat. Thank you. He stood at the edge of the bed, watching her with a gentleness she hadn't seen before. You okay? She hesitated, then nodded. I think so. He took a breath. Because if last night crossed a line, it did. That made him freeze. She looked up at him, her voice soft but sure. But it's a line I wanted to cross. Relief flickered through his expression, but it was tempered with something else. Caution, maybe. Or guilt. I've been trying to protect you from this, he said. From what? From me. He looked away. From what this kind of life does to people. To love. My parents tried to fake their way through a marriage for the public. They hated each other in private, but smiled like royalty at every gala. I promised myself I'd never repeat that story. Sierra's voice was quiet. And yet here we are. Dominic turned to her, his jaw tightening. But this doesn't feel fake anymore. And that scares me. She rose from the bed, still holding her coffee. Dominic, I'm not your mother, and you're not your father. We're not doomed to their ending just because we started with a contract. His eyes found hers. And what if this ends badly? Then it ends badly, she said, stepping closer. But at least it was ours. Not staged. Not for appearances. Real. He exhaled slowly, his hand brushing hers. You amaze me. She smiled softly. You confuse me. Later that afternoon, they attended the Vineyard Trust Building Retreats Couples Communication Workshop, a well-meaning but awkward activity led by a woman named Clover who wore crystals and spoke exclusively in metaphors about roots and rivers. They were seated in a semicircle with other couples, most of whom were twice their age and had been together for decades. The questions ranged from simple, "What color is your partner's aura?" to deeply intrusive, "When was the last time you felt truly vulnerable in this relationship?" Sierra shot Dominic a look. He smirked. When their turn came, Clover beamed at them. "Tell us something your partner does that makes you feel safe." Sierra hesitated, glancing sideways at Dominic. "He listens," she said at last, "even when I'm not saying anything out loud." Dominic looked at her with something tender in his eyes, then said, "She sees me. Not the company, not the name, just me." There was a quiet moment after that. Then Clover clapped her hands softly. "Beautiful. You two have strong roots." Sierra wasn't sure if she believed in aura colors or root energy, but she believed in the man sitting beside her. And that was enough. After dinner, they took a walk through the vineyard paths, the sky overhead painted in watercolor shades of pink and lavender. Dominic's hand found hers easily, their fingers weaving together like it was second nature. "Are we really going back to LA tomorrow?" Sierra asked. "Unless you want to start a vineyard," he teased. "I can fake knowledge of grapes better than yoga." She smiled but didn't answer. He glanced at her. "What is it?" She slowed to a stop. "There's something I haven't told you." His expression turned serious. "Okay, I got an offer. A gallery in Echo Park wants to feature a solo exhibit of my work. Opening night in 6 weeks. Dominic's eyebrows lifted. "That's incredible, Sierra. I didn't tell them about us. I wanted the invitation to be based on my art, not my last name." He stepped closer. "Then it is. You've earned this. I've already started some of the pieces. I wasn't sure if I'd show them, but now I think I want to." He reached up and tucked a curl behind her ear. "You should." She looked up at him. "There's more. Go on. One of the pieces, it's about you." That made him still. "It's not romantic," she clarified. "It's about power and restraint. It's about what it means to love someone who can't always say the words." His eyes flickered. "And how does it end?" Sierra's voice dropped. "I don't know yet. I think I'm still painting it." He leaned in. "Maybe we'll figure it out together." She smiled, small but full of hope. They kissed again under the stars. But unlike last night, this kiss didn't feel like a line crossed. It felt like a homecoming. Back at the villa, Sierra showered and pulled on one of Dominic's hoodies, curling up on the oversized couch with a sketch pad. Her pencil danced across the page, not planning, just letting her feelings bleed onto paper. Dominic walked out of the bedroom shirtless, toweling off his hair. She didn't even pretend not to look. "You're staring," he said without glancing up. "I'm studying," she replied. "For art purposes?" Undecided. He walked over, leaned down, and kissed her cheek. "I like you in my clothes." Sierra flipped her pencil in her fingers. "Do you always flirt when you're emotionally exposed?" "Only when I'm falling." Her heart did a little somersault. "Dominic." Don't break me." He turned to her, suddenly serious. "I won't. You can't promise that. But I will try like hell not to." Sierra stared at him for a long moment, then nodded once. "Okay." It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't a vow. But it was a beginning. And right now, that was enough. Chapter 10, A Name in the Shadows. The flight back to Los Angeles was quiet. Not uncomfortable, but thoughtful. Sierra stared out the private jet window as the clouds shifted below like waves. Her fingers curled loosely in Dominic's. Neither spoke much, and they didn't need to. After Napa, the silence between them wasn't avoidance. It was intimacy. But peace, as always, had a time limit. When they landed at Voss Tower, a tall, sleek man in a suit greeted them at the private hangar. "Mr. Voss," he said briskly, ignoring Sierra altogether. Dominic's face shifted. "Eric, what's wrong?" "There's been a development," the man replied. "Your father's legal team filed an injunction against the India expansion deal, citing intellectual property breach." Dominic's eyes darkened. "That's ridiculous." "Unfortunately, The timing isn't. The board wants to discuss a potential internal investigation. Of course they do, Dominic muttered. He glanced at Sierra, then back to Eric. Handle it. Call Langston. And give me the contract drafts. Now. Eric nodded and walked off, tapping rapidly on his phone. Sierra raised a brow. That was intense. That was my father being petty. Again. He rubbed his temples. He's been waiting for a moment like this. A loophole. A whisper of scandal. Anything to make me look unstable. You're not. Dominic looked at her, jaw tight. It doesn't matter what's true. It matters what can be spun. In business, perception is leverage. And right now he's stacking the odds. They rode in silence back to the penthouse. The view of the city twinkling below felt surreal, like they'd re-entered a harsher, colder dimension after a dreamy escape. As soon as they stepped inside, Dominic disappeared into his home office, and Sierra went to the studio. She stared at her canvas. What had once been a storm of chaotic brushstrokes now looked like something else. A man in silhouette, standing at a crossroads, surrounded by firelight and fog. His face wasn't visible, but the shape was unmistakably Dominic. She picked up her brush and made a single, deliberate stroke of gold near his chest. Hope. Later that evening, Sierra stepped out of the shower, wrapped in a robe, when she heard it. A soft knock. Not at the front door, but the private elevator. Odd. Dominic had gone back to the office 2 hours earlier. Curious, she approached the security panel. The feed showed a woman, elegant, with sleek dark hair and red lips, wearing an expensive coat and holding a slim leather briefcase. She buzzed her incautiously. When the elevator doors opened, the woman stepped inside with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. You must be Sierra, she said, voice smooth as velvet. I'm Candace Beaumont, Dominic's legal advisor. Sierra tightened the belt of her robe. Dominic's not here. Oh, I know. Candace stepped inside anyway. But you are. And I have something you need to see. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a glossy black folder, handing it over like a bomb disguised as a gift. Sierra frowned and opened it. Inside were photos. Of her. At art shows, at her old apartment, laughing with her ex-boyfriend. Newspaper clippings. Private emails. Old resumes. And the final page, a non-disclosure agreement. What is this? She asked, throat dry. Candace's smile sharpened. Dominic's father is preparing a media release. He plans to expose your contract marriage as fraud. Claim you seduced Dominic to gain access to funding for your art. Sierra's heart dropped. That's not true. Of course it's not, Candace replied. But truth has never stopped Victor Voss. He deals in headlines and courtroom whispers. She tapped the folder. If you sign this, you protect Dominic. You disappear quietly. No scandal, no mess. And if I don't? Candace's expression turned icy. Then the press gets the full narrative. And your entire career becomes a footnote in his downfall. For a moment, Sierra couldn't speak. I thought you worked for Dominic, she whispered. I work for whoever pays more. With that, Candace turned on her heel and left. The door clicked shut like a gavel. Dominic found her an hour later, sitting on the couch with the black folder still in her lap. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. What happened? He asked immediately. Sierra held out the folder. He scanned the contents, his expression darkening by the second. Candace did this. She said your father is going to bury us in scandal. That he'll ruin my name. Dominic dropped the folder onto the table like it burned him. That woman is a viper. She's been loyal to my father for years, playing both sides. I should have fired her months ago. I thought it didn't matter what was true, Sierra said quietly. Only what could be spun. Dominic flinched. That's why I'm going to shut this down before it starts. She looked up at him. How? I'll go public. I'll tell the truth, about the contract, about how it started. Then I'll tell them it changed. That I fell in love with you. Her eyes widened. Dominic. I don't care what they think, he said. Not anymore. Let them twist headlines. Let them question motives. I'm done pretending. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back. You'd risk your company? Your legacy? He knelt in front of her, cupping her face gently. I'd risk everything, he said. Because for the first time, I'm building something worth more than the empire. Her tears fell then, quiet and free. Not because she was afraid, but because she believed him. That night, Sierra returned to the studio. She picked up her brush with a clarity she hadn't felt in weeks. She painted for hours. When she finally stepped back, the figure in the painting stood tall, no longer hidden in shadow. The gold she'd added earlier now glowed like fire in his chest. And behind him, her. Not clinging to him, not saved by him. Beside him, as an equal. She smiled. This was the ending she wanted. But in the darkness of early morning, as the city slept, a storm was brewing. And by dawn, a name would appear on every news headline in bold black font. Fake wife, real scandal. The truth about Sierra Quinn. Dominic Voss would wake up to war, and Sierra Quinn would have to decide, run from the spotlight, or finally step into it. Chapter 11. The Woman Behind the Headlines. Sierra's eyes snapped open to the shrill vibration of Dominic's phone against the nightstand. The room was still dark, only the first hints of gray seeping in from the city skyline. She sat up slowly, heart thudding. Dominic was already awake, sitting at the edge of the bed, phone pressed to his ear. His shoulders were tense, his jaw sharp in the low light. No, absolutely not, he said coldly into the receiver. Shut it down. Now. He ended the call, then stared at the phone in his hand for a long moment before tossing it onto the bed. Sierra's voice was soft. It's out, isn't it? Dominic turned, his eyes filled with a storm of fury and regret. It broke just before dawn. Front page on 2 gossip outlets, picked up by the business networks within minutes. She wrapped her arms around herself, the early morning chill pressing in. What did they say? He stood and paced toward the window, running a hand through his hair. They're calling it a corporate manipulation stunt, accusing me of using a fake marriage to shield the Voss family brand after the embezzlement investigation into my father last year. Claiming you're a struggling artist who traded love for leverage. Sierra looked down at her hands. It's not like we didn't give them fuel. Dominic turned sharply. You didn't do anything wrong. None of this is on you. I signed the contract, she said quietly. I agreed to this. You agreed to help me survive a board coup, he said. Not to become a pawn in my father's PR war. She rose, pulling on a robe and walking toward him. So what now? I've already called my lawyers. We're preparing a formal statement. Sierra's stomach twisted. And what's it going to say? Dominic hesitated. The truth. She raised an eyebrow. Which truth? He didn't answer right away. That we started as a lie, he said finally, but became something real. Sierra's breath caught in her throat. The words she'd been longing to hear now sat in the air between them. Beautiful, terrifying, and irreversible. By 9 a.m., their penthouse was a war zone. Publicists, lawyers, and executive assistants flowed in and out like a battalion. A crisis media manager named Serena arrived in heels sharp enough to kill and began coordinating talking points with robotic efficiency. Dominic stood at the head of the living room, giving rapid-fire instructions. No photos released of Sierra without clearance. No comment on the contract details. We're redirecting the narrative. This isn't about scandal. It's about legacy and reform. Serena nodded. The key will be authenticity. If we control the story before the press twists it. I don't want to control the story, Dominic said. I want to own it. Sierra, standing near the kitchen island with a cup of untouched tea, listened quietly as her life was dissected and rebranded in real time. Someone shoved a folder toward her. These are the statements we drafted for your social media. You'll need to post within the hour. She barely looked at it. Dominic noticed. Sierra? She looked at him, her voice low. I didn't sign up for this part. He dismissed the team with a nod. They scattered instantly. Once alone, he walked over. You don't have to say anything you don't believe. I'm not sure what I believe right now. He reached for her hand. Then let's figure it out. Together. She studied him. The man she'd fallen for wasn't the cold executive the media was crucifying. He was the one who brewed her coffee just right, who let her fall asleep with paint on her face, who held her without needing words. But the world didn't see that man. They only saw the story, and she had a decision to make. That afternoon, Sierra walked out of the building alone. No security, no entourage, just her and the California sun. She didn't tell Dominic. She needed air. She took the metro downtown, her hoodie pulled low and sunglasses shielding her eyes. No one recognized her. Or maybe they did, and simply didn't care. The city moved fast. It always did. She found herself standing in front of the small community gallery where she had first shown her work. It looked the same, modest, sun-dappled, humming with quiet creativity. Inside, a young woman was arranging canvases for an upcoming show. Can I help you? She asked with a warm smile. Sierra nodded. I used to show here. A few years ago. Oh, what's your name? Sierra hesitated. Sierra Quinn. The woman's eyes widened. Wait, the Sierra Quinn? From the headlines? Sierra braced herself. But then the girl beamed. You're my favorite artist. I studied your brushwork in undergrad. The way you layer grief and growth, it changed how I paint. Sierra blinked, stunned. The girl glanced around. Can I ask something? Sierra nodded. Are you okay? The simplicity of the question undid her. She smiled softly. Yeah, I think I am. She returned to the penthouse at dusk. Dominic was pacing by the windows, phone to his ear, stress written into every line of his body. The moment he saw her, he dropped the call. Where did you go? Somewhere I could remember who I was before all of this. He stepped toward her, searching her face. And I remembered I liked her. His expression softened. She walked over and placed a small, folded piece of paper in his palm. What's this? My truth. He opened it. Inside, her handwriting read, I didn't marry you for power. I didn't fall for you because of your name. I loved you in spite of those things. And I won't hide it anymore. Dominic looked up, eyes clouded. You love me. She nodded. I think I did before I even realized it. He cupped her face, breath trembling. I've never loved anyone the way I love you. And there it was. No boardroom, no cameras, no contracts. Just two broken people who had chosen each other. The next morning, Sierra posted a video. No filters, no lighting team. Just her on a stool in her studio, brush in hand, paint under her nails. My name is Sierra Quinn, she began, her voice steady. And I'm not a fraud. She told the world everything. Not the scandal, but the story. The woman behind the headlines. The artist who painted pain. The girl who said yes to a contract and found herself in the process. The wife who wasn't born for fame, but who had found something real in a man she never expected to love. By noon, it had gone viral. Not because it was sensational, because it was true. And truth, when spoken in love, always finds a way to rise. Chapter 12, When the World Watches. The world watched. They always did. But this time, Sierra didn't feel like she was standing on a stage built by someone else. She wasn't a character written into a tabloid script or a shadow in someone else's empire. This time, she was standing tall, brush in hand, truth on her tongue. And the world listened. The video she had posted from her art studio had been raw and unfiltered, a 3-minute confession without any media polish. But it resonated. With artists. With dreamers. With anyone who had ever been mislabeled, misjudged, misunderstood. By noon, it had crossed 10 million views. By evening, it was on national news. By the next morning, it had rewritten the narrative. No longer the fake wife. Now, she was the artist who told the truth. Dominic Voss stood at the edge of his penthouse living room, watching the news cycle churn through the unexpected turn of public sentiment. His phone buzzed nonstop with messages from board members, allies, reporters, even distant family. But none of that mattered more than the woman beside him. Sierra walked barefoot across the hardwood floor, mug of tea in her hand, as if she hadn't just dismantled a billion-dollar media storm with her authenticity. You broke the internet, he said, with a proud smile. She shrugged, sipping her tea. Wasn't my plan. I just couldn't let someone else tell my story. He watched her for a moment. You didn't just defend yourself. You defended me, too. I told the truth, she replied. And the truth is, you weren't the villain. You were the man who tried to protect me. Dominic walked over and reached for her free hand. You saved my legacy without even trying. She raised an eyebrow. Your legacy? Isn't the company, he said softly. It's the man I'm becoming. Because of you. Her breath caught at the warmth in his words. She searched his face and saw not the powerful billionaire the world revered or feared, but a man who was learning to love without armor. I don't know what happens next, she whispered. We face it, he said. Together. But together didn't mean easy. The board of Voss International still demanded an emergency meeting. Some called for Dominic to step down as CEO temporarily to avoid further damage. Others wanted an independent audit of all his personal and professional decisions over the past year. Sierra sat in the far corner of the glossy glass conference room as Dominic stood at the head of the table, calm, poised, powerful. I understand the concern, he said. But let's be honest, this isn't about PR. It's about my father pulling strings behind closed doors. Several board members exchanged nervous glances. I'm not stepping down, Dominic continued. Not because I'm untouchable, but because I'm finally building something I believe in. And I won't let your fear undo the future we're creating. One member, an older woman named Lorraine who'd known Dominic since he was a teenager, leaned forward. You've grown, Dominic. But perception matters. Are you willing to risk the next phase of the company on your personal relationship? Dominic looked over at Sierra. She didn't flinch. Yes, he said. Because she's not a distraction. She's the reason I finally understand what this company is supposed to be. And what's that? Someone asked. A platform for transformation, he replied. For truth. For rebuilding. He paused. And if that's not what Voss International stands for, then maybe I'm not the one who needs to leave. Silence fell over the room. Lorraine smiled. Motioned to keep Dominic as CEO. Seconded. Carried. Just like that, the tide turned. Sierra exhaled slowly. Later, they celebrated in the quietest way possible. No galas. No parties. No press statements. Just takeout Thai, 2 glasses of sparkling cider, and a rooftop view of Los Angeles at dusk. Sierra leaned her head on Dominic's shoulder as the city lights flickered on one by one. You've changed, she murmured. He smiled. So have you. I don't feel like I'm pretending anymore. You never were. She looked up at him. I used to think I had to be loud or edgy to be seen. But maybe I just needed to be honest. That's what made the world listen, he said. You weren't trying to impress anyone. You just showed up. She traced the rim of her glass. When I was 15, I thought I had to be someone dramatic to be worthy of love. Dominic's brow furrowed. And now I think I just had to be brave. He kissed her forehead, lingering there. You're the bravest woman I've ever met. The next day, they received an invitation Sierra never expected. A major modern art museum in downtown LA had seen her video, her paintings, and her story. They offered her not just an exhibit, but a 6-month residency. She stood in the middle of the gallery, stunned, as the curator handed her a contract. People want to see your work, Ms. Quinn, the curator said, because it makes them feel seen. Sierra looked down at her hands. The same hands that had once trembled with self-doubt now held her future. She smiled. I accept. On opening night, she wore a midnight blue gown. Simple, elegant, powerful. Dominic wore a charcoal suit. No tie. Just enough undone to remind the world he wasn't here to impress them. The gallery was filled with press, collectors, art lovers, and influencers. But Sierra didn't look at the crowd. She looked at her paintings. Each one told a chapter of her journey. The chaos, the compromise, the love, the letting go. And in the final frame, the piece she titled Becoming. A woman stood in profile, facing a city skyline. Her reflection was no longer broken or blurred. It was whole. Later, while the room buzzed with praise and clinking glasses, Dominic found her in the quiet corner of the exhibit. You did it, he said. She turned to him. We did. He pulled something from his pocket. Not a ring. A key. To the Vineyard House, he said. I had it signed into your name. Sierra's eyes widened. Why? Because you deserve a space that's yours, he said. Because it's where we began. And because I'd like to go back there with you one day, not as part of a scheme. As your partner. She took the key, tears stinging her eyes. I'm not going anywhere, she whispered. He smiled. Then let's keep building. And when he kissed her, softly, sweetly, reverently, the room didn't fade. The world didn't disappear. But for once, it didn't need to. Because they weren't hiding anymore. Chapter 13. Our Kind of Forever. The vineyard was quieter than Sierra remembered. The same wind rustled the olive trees. The same golden light kissed the hills at dusk. But something had changed. She had changed. Sierra stepped out of the car, her sandals crunching softly on the gravel path. The scent of lavender wrapped around her like a memory. The cottage in the distance still had its white shutters and ivy-covered porch. But now it was hers. Or rather, theirs. Dominic came around to her side and reached for her hand. He wore no suit today, just a soft gray Henley and jeans. He looked younger here, less polished, more grounded. Like a man who had finally come home. You sure about this? He asked. She smiled. I've never been surer of anything. They walked up to the porch together. As Dominic unlocked the door, Sierra glanced out at the rows of vines stretching into the distance. What once looked like confinement now felt like possibility. Inside, the cottage was just as they'd left it, with beams, wide windows, and faint traces of paint on the stone fireplace from the night she'd first let herself feel something real again. Dominic stood in the middle of the living room, watching her take it all in. "I thought about this moment 1,000 times," he said. She turned to him. And it's better than every version I imagined." They spent the evening unpacking small things. Books, a record player, a new coffee grinder Dominic insisted was a non-negotiable. They moved slowly, intentionally, as if they were placing not just objects but roots. By twilight, they sat on the back porch, 2 glasses of cider between them, watching the sky burn into violet. "I never thought I'd want this," Dominic said quietly. "A life like this." Sierra rested her chin on her knees. "Why not?" "Because I didn't believe in quiet. Or peace. Or love. Not really. And now." He looked at her, the last light of the sun turning his eyes amber. "Now I know it was all I ever needed." The following morning, they walked through the vineyard hand in hand, inspecting the vines with the local caretaker. Dominic asked about harvest schedules, irrigation systems, and soil health with genuine interest. Sierra couldn't help but smile. "You're really into this." Dominic shrugged. "It's different from boardrooms and balance sheets. It's slower. More honest. It suits you." He grinned. "You think I'd make a good vintner?" "I think you'd make a good anything. As long as you do it with your whole heart." He leaned in, kissed her temple. "I'm trying." She looked up at him. "You're succeeding." They stopped near the far edge of the property where the land sloped into wild grasses. Sierra picked a sprig of rosemary and twirled it between her fingers. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what comes next." Dominic waited. "The residency ends in 6 months," she said, "and I've loved every minute of it. But I don't want to go back to the life I had before." He turned to face her fully. "What life do you want?" She smiled, a little shyly. "One we build together." He took the rosemary from her fingers and tucked it behind her ear. "I want that too." Over the next few weeks, they fell into a rhythm neither had expected but both came to cherish. Mornings were for coffee and quiet reading. Afternoons, Dominic took calls with the LA office while Sierra painted in the studio they'd converted out of the old barn. In the evenings, they cooked together, danced barefoot to old records, and talked about everything and nothing. It wasn't perfect. They disagreed sometimes, over furniture choices, whether to put a fence around the garden, or how late was too late for work calls. But they always returned to each other. With apology. With grace. With love. One evening, after they'd hosted a small dinner with the local vintners, Sierra walked out onto the porch alone. The stars were out, clear, bright, and infinite. She pulled her shawl tighter and looked up. She'd never known it was possible to feel so free and so anchored at the same time. Dominic joined her minutes later, holding 2 mugs of tea. "You always come out here after people leave," he said. "It helps me breathe." He handed her a mug. "Do you miss the city?" "Sometimes. The noise. The pace. The art." He looked over. "Do you miss who you were there?" She thought about that. "No," she said finally. "Because I think I found her here." He nodded. "I was afraid you'd disappear after the scandal. That the world would take something from you." "It did," she said softly. "But it gave me something better." He stepped closer. "Sierra." She reached for his hand. "Wait." She went inside, returned a moment later holding something behind her back. "I've been working on something," she said. He raised a brow. "Another painting?" She pulled it out. It was a small canvas, only 12 by 12. On it, a house surrounded by vines, the sky painted in bold strokes of purple and gold. 2 figures stood on the porch, holding hands. At the bottom, in her delicate handwriting, "Our kind of forever." Dominic took the painting, swallowing hard. "Sierra, I know we didn't plan this," she said, voice thick. "And I know it started with a lie. But everything after, it's been real. And if you're still sure, then I'd like to make this forever." He looked at her with such intensity that her breath caught. Then he set the painting down carefully, dropped to one knee, and pulled a velvet box from his pocket. "I was going to wait," he said, voice unsteady. "But I don't want to wait anymore." He opened the box. Inside, a simple, stunning ring, rose gold, with a single diamond set in a band shaped like intertwined vines. "Sierra Quinn," he said, "will you marry me for real?" Tears spilled down her cheeks as she laughed. "Only if we skip the contract this time." He grinned. "Deal." And as she whispered yes, and he slipped the ring onto her finger, the stars above them glowed like 1,000 silent witnesses to a love story that defied every headline. They were no longer the scandal. They were no longer the performance. They were simply a man and a woman who had chosen each other. And this time for keeps. Chapter 14, signed in paint and vows. The chapel was nestled between rows of wild olive trees, the air fragrant with late spring blossoms. Sierra stood at the edge of the vineyard courtyard in a dress that wasn't designer, but hers, a soft ivory silk gown she'd sewn herself, each stitch a quiet vow of healing. Her hair was swept back loosely, a sprig of rosemary tucked behind one ear. Across the courtyard, Dominic waited. He wore a navy suit with no tie, his hands loosely clasped, a rare softness in his usually sharp gaze. There were no photographers, no orchestrated press coverage, just a few close friends, some vineyard staff, and the local pastor whose wrinkled eyes twinkled as he waited at the archway framed in painted vines and sunlight. Sierra stepped forward, her heart thrumming like the chords of a hymn. Every step felt sacred, not because of the ceremony, but because of the choice. Because today, she was walking toward a man who had once hidden behind power, now stripped of pretense and standing in the open, offering not a deal, but himself. When she reached him, Dominic didn't speak right away. He just took her hand, as if grounding himself in her presence. "I've never been more sure of anything," he whispered. The pastor smiled gently. "Before we begin, the couple has asked to share their own words." Sierra exhaled slowly, then turned to Dominic. "I never imagined this," she began, voice trembling. "Not the vineyard. Not you. Not love. At least, not like this." She paused, gathering herself. "When I met you, I thought you were everything I hated, controlled, closed off, too proud to feel anything real. But behind that armor, there was a man who carried wounds like I carried colors, quietly, deeply, and desperately hoping someone would see them." Tears shimmered in her eyes. "You didn't just give me a place to heal. You showed me what it means to stay when it's hard, to choose each other even when the headlines lie and the world doubts. You gave me back myself, and I choose you, not for a contract, not for security, but for the way you see me, for the way you fight for love like it's worth everything." Dominic's jaw clenched, emotion pressing against his chest. He took a shaky breath, then began. "I never wanted to be vulnerable," he said. "I was raised to believe that emotion was weakness. That connection was a liability. But then you came into my life with paint on your fingers and light in your eyes, and you shattered everything I thought I knew." His hand trembled slightly as he cupped her cheek. "You didn't just make me feel. You made me believe. In grace. In redemption. In the kind of love that doesn't run when things get messy. You saw the parts of me I buried, and you didn't flinch. You stood with me when no one else would. You reminded me I could be more than my name. And I want to spend the rest of my life being worthy of the faith you put in me." Sierra let out a soft breath, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. The pastor's voice rose gently, reverent. "Do you, Dominic Voss, take Sierra Quinn to be your lawfully wedded wife, to love, to cherish, to build and rebuild, for all your days?" "I do." "And do you, Sierra Quinn, take Dominic Voss to be your lawfully wedded husband, to love, to honor, to walk with in every season?" "I do." The pastor nodded. "Then by the love you've declared and the grace that has held you both, I pronounce you husband and wife." Dominic leaned in, slow, certain, and kissed her. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't performative. It was the kiss of two people who had fought their way back to one another through storms and silence, scandal and sacrifice. And now, they were home. The reception was simple, with tables under string lights, fresh bread, wine from their own vineyard, laughter ringing across the golden hills. Sierra sat with her feet tucked beneath her, dress gathered around her knees, watching Dominic as he spoke with the vineyard staff like old friends. He laughed freely now, the weight that once pressed down on his shoulders lifted. "You okay?" came a familiar voice. She turned to see Callie, her best friend and co-maid of honor, holding a second slice of lemon cake and 2 forks. "Better than okay," Sierra whispered. Callie nudged her playfully. "You cried like 5 times. They were earned tears." Callie smiled, but her eyes softened. "You're happy." "I am." Sierra looked out across the field, where lanterns bobbed like fireflies and music floated gently from the record player someone had set up on a wine barrel. "But it's more than that," she added. "I'm whole." Later that night, long after the guests had gone and the stars blanketed the sky, Dominic carried her over the threshold of the vineyard cottage. Not because it was tradition, but because he wanted to. Inside, the fire was already lit, casting a warm glow over the walls they had painted together. Sierra walked to the center of the room and turned. "I never thought I'd want to stay in one place," she said. Dominic came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "You don't have to," he whispered against her neck. "Just stay with me." She leaned back against him. "That's the only part one never want to change." At sunrise, Sierra sat in her studio, a fresh canvas before her. She dipped her brush into crimson, then gold, then olive green. Dominic walked in wearing one of her paint-stained hoodies, 2 mugs in hand. "What are you working on?" She smiled. "Our forever." He looked at the painting, still a blur of colors and beginnings. "It's messy," he said. She grinned. "So are we." And as she painted, and he sat beside her, they didn't need to chase perfection. They had built something better, something honest, something sacred. Chapter 15. More Than a Name. 6 months later, Sierra stood in the heart of the vineyard, her bare feet cool against the earth, the morning light turning the grapevines into a sea of green gold. In one hand, she held a sketchbook. In the other, a delicate letter she hadn't yet opened. The envelope bore the Voss International seal. But it wasn't just business anymore. She glanced toward the cottage where the scent of fresh bread wafted through the open windows. A laugh echoed from inside, Dominic's, and it made her smile without even meaning to. Their home, their story, and now, maybe, their legacy. She walked slowly back toward the porch, her mind still lingering on the conversation they'd had the night before. "I think it's time," Dominic had said as they sat curled on the couch, their legs tangled under a shared blanket, "to decide what we're building beyond us." "What do you mean?" He turned to face her fully. "The vineyard's thriving. Your art is changing lives. The company's finally realigned with the values we believe in. I want to know what we're doing with all this." Sierra had stared at him, at the man she once thought she could never understand. Now, she knew every crease in his hand, every look in his eyes. "What if we built something no one expected?" she'd said. "Like what?" And she had smiled. Back in the kitchen, Dominic was flipping pancakes. He had flour on his cheek and a serious look of concentration as he tried to perfect the swirl of batter. "Please tell me you're painting that masterpiece," she teased. He looked up, grinning. "You laugh, but I think this might be my finest work yet." She leaned against the counter and held up the unopened envelope. "They sent it." He paused, lowering the spatula. "Are you ready?" She nodded, and together they sat at the little breakfast table facing the vineyard, the sun rising behind them. Sierra broke the seal and unfolded the letter. She read it aloud. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Voss, after thorough review, the board of directors at the Voss Foundation has unanimously voted to approve your proposed initiative under the new grant program." Her voice trembled. "The Quinn and Voss Collective, a residency for artists healing through story." Dominic reached across the table and took her hand. "You did it." She looked at him, tears shining. "We did it." The idea had been simple. Use a portion of the Voss philanthropic branch to create something new. A haven for artists. Not just to create, but to heal. A place where truth, creativity, and grace could converge. Located on the vineyard estate. Fully funded. Entirely hers to direct. Sierra stood from the table, heart racing. "Dominic, I can't believe they said yes." He walked over, wrapped his arms around her waist. "Of course they said yes. You've built something that matters." She smiled. "We both did. But you named it after both of us," he said, softly. "You could have just named it Quinn Collective." Sierra looked up at him. "Because it was you who taught me that my name doesn't have to erase someone else's. And yours doesn't have to be a prison." He blinked, caught off guard by the depth of her words. "I always thought your last name came with chains," she continued. "But maybe we can turn it into something else." Dominic brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "Like what?" "Legacy," she whispered. That weekend, they hosted their first artists' brunch. Dozens of guests from all over the country arrived, many of them creatives who had struggled through grief, rejection, or trauma. Sierra led a painting session beneath the olive trees. Dominic spoke quietly to small groups about rebuilding, about failure, about how his greatest redemption hadn't come through business, but through love. No headlines. No scandals, just honesty. One of the guests, a poet in her 70s, came up to Sierra near the end of the day, holding her hand. You have no idea what this means to people like me, she said. I spent 40 years hiding my work because someone told me it wasn't good enough. But your story, it reminded me I still have something worth saying. Sierra pressed her hand gently. You do. We all do. That night, back in the studio, Sierra stood in front of her largest canvas yet. She had painted 2 hands reaching for each other, one streaked with gold, the other dusted with charcoal. Between them, a spark. A beginning. Dominic came in silently behind her. Is that us? He asked. She nodded. Every messy, beautiful inch. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. I used to think love meant sacrifice, he said. Now I think it means freedom. Sierra turned to face him. It means becoming, she said. They stood like that, surrounded by color and quiet and the hum of something eternal. Months later, at the second residency opening, a reporter approached them. I have to ask, she said, smiling. Your story has captured so many hearts. Is there a particular reason you decided to use both your names for the foundation? Sierra glanced at Dominic. He smiled, letting her speak. She turned to the reporter and said simply, because we are more than a name. We are a story, and stories are always better when written together. In the years that followed, the Quinn and Voss collective became a beacon, an international model for creative restoration. Artists from every background came and left with something more than technique. They left with hope. Dominic and Sierra never chased fame again. They chased truth. And each other. Every morning was a new brushstroke. Every evening, a fresh line of poetry in their shared journal of forever. Their love wasn't flashy. It was fierce and faithful. It was made of second chances, quiet mornings, hard conversations, and 1,000 choices to stay. Their love was more than a story. It was their kind of forever. The end. Thank you so much for listening to His Property, a fake marriage romance, a journey of grace, redemption, and a love that bloomed in the most unexpected place. Dominic and Sierra taught us that healing isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's quiet mornings, second chances, and learning to see yourself through the eyes of someone who stays. In a world full of contracts and conditions, their love was a choice, repeated, refined, and finally real. We hope this story reminded you that you are more than your past, that love can be slow, sacred, and written in brushstrokes of grace. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe for more emotionally rich, clean romance audiobooks. And don't forget to leave a comment. We'd love to hear your favorite moment. Until the next love story. Ever After Audiobooks.